this is my presentation. This is technically my second go through of this, so I'm not sure I remember everything I said, but also go off my notes. I guess to initially start, I incorporated three images. One from class that was from John Whitney that I actually have seen before, and I've always loved it. It's been one of my favorite kind of like people call it like psychedelic in this like digital way because it was kind of around the same time in the 60s where people were kind of getting into the hippie movement where a lot of that like trance stuff was really interesting, and so I really enjoyed this kind of like technical skill that goes into that. But in the center here I incorporated a piece of Pike's work that was, I don't think, included in the video that we were required to watch, but I sought it out on my own because I was really interested in a lot of the subtextual meaning that was not quite covered in that. Um, and I honestly couldn't find much more about people talking about it as well, so I kind of wanted to talk about it in the way I experienced this work initially. But I'll get to that a little bit later. But I was really inspired by like this specific piece, as well as the TV Buddha one. And then the third image I incorporated was actually a art installation in a town kind of outside or beside the Salton Sea in California. I took this photo in 2022 when I was visiting my family, and this a lot of the places stood out to me. I'm not gonna lie, they were a lot of really cool installations. But this one really stood out to me because one, it kind of reminded me of another art medium that I'm really interested in, which is comics. So it's kind of like this way of like narrating in panels and in pieces, and kind of just like having this like one big conglomerate picture kind of put together. Um, and then also just like from this like retro perspective that they're reusing and kind of like re I don't want to say upcycling, but kind of like reinventing or like giving new life to something that was like thrown out. So like these televisions that obviously no longer work or no longer in use are being repurposed, and so it's kind of like a much it's a different way of incorporating art and technology that isn't quite as technology heavy. It's more as like the medium here is paint on the TV rather than the TV itself being on TV's blank canvas, and that's what really interested me. Um, so yeah. So with this, the medium is the message, and why I was so fascinated by a lot of the stuff we covered was I was not actually aware of the particular philosophy of McLuhan and his I guess like just everything he said, to be honest, because I was originally in art and I went to an art school and I was an animation major and a comics major. And then I flipped a third time to art history because I realized I was really interested not just in the narrative and storytelling aspect of art, but in like the ways in which art intersects with so many different ties in how what makes us human. So not just like science and technology, but also just like communications and social behaviors and like all these other things. But at, in doing so, I took a lot of modern and contemporary art history classes, and they kind of already kind of harped on the fact that the medium in enhances the message, and so it's in a way not necessarily better or worse, but it creates more depth to a piece when you work with different mediums to kind of express this message that you're looking to communicate. And so this 2022, 2023, actually no, it was before that, I'm so sorry. 2019 to 2022, I was in this like phase of just really trying to understand more about it, and so I feel like this McLuhan's ideas presented in this class really helped tie in and really solidify all these ideas for me, that the reason why I'm so connected to and I enjoy the physical print media and being able to work with that relates to how I want to convey my message in my pieces. And so I incorporated a piece that I have made in previous classes, kind of using that same idea. Um, And I think also what's interesting to notice that like we were kind of taught about this intersection of messaging medium and this divestment from I guess like the digital spaces hadn't quite existed yet, but it's kind of like the beginning of this like speak was in like around the 1920s with the Harlem Renaissance. So it kind of fascinated me to see that like this school of thought, if you will, kind of advanced into its and like blossomed in its own way in another area. Like technology and art both had their own versions of this understanding of how does something like a message get communicated. Um, and in that way, we've kind of advanced with a lot of our society currently. We have, I'm literally speaking into a phone for a microphone right now that can access thousands and thousands upon millions of data points that I could look and understand and like communicate to different people. I could talk to somebody who's in like a totally different time zone than me. Things that we were experiencing in the 70s were just like baby steps to the progressive milestones we're existing in now. And I think that that's also something that really fascinates me with this class is that we're kind of being able to understand the groundwork and the history that went into a lot of like these advancements of communications. Like what were people like saying about technology as it was unfolding, as it was like transitioning from this like big computer in a big room with a bunch of like spinning wheels and blinking lights to like a 12 by 13 like perhaps like inch long flat little piece of metal. You know, it's a little different to kind of understand how you can create art in different ways with these different mediums and kind of understand that like their interfaces kind of change, and so how we interact with them changes, how our thought process and our systems that we personally have when we're like, okay, so I'm gonna intentionally like go up to my computer, turn on like the big button. I'm gonna do all these different like ritualistic things to turn it on, or make it work, or do like check my email. Whereas like those systems have changed over time, and so that in itself changes how we relate to technology as well. And I think that was actually in Drucker's article as well. They kind of spoke about the changes and kind of abstractions of that, but in that they also spoke about marginalia. And I think that was something that actually fascinated me as well, because that's something that kind of ties into what I went into being an art historian for, which was I chose initially to be a medieval art uh, focus because I was really fascinated by this kind of, it's not necessarily romanticism period, it's a totally different period, but I feel as if there was a very romantic um, kind of feeling that came about, and a very deep spiritual like connection between art and the way in which you could like interact with it, mostly because it was the canonized stuff was made by churches and people who were in churches. But that does not necessarily take away from its impact, I believe. I think that actually accentuates it, because there are these ways in which we can see that these buildings are created to kind of detach you from the rest of the world, and there's some parts of it that you're supposed to just kind of like experience in person. And there's a lot of it's a lot to do with how you walk through a space. And I'm probably gonna talk about that a lot today, but the ways in which technique and aesthetics worked for that period kind of, it relates to how I consider and think about the digital sphere now, and how like the marginalia we use now in the digital era is completely different than how it was even just 20 years ago. Um, I in this slide highlighted John Whitney for his rigor and technique, because I wanted to kind of compare his dedication to animation and creating a machine to kind of work with him and for him, and compare that to like the kind of like dedication, I would say, is kind of the that would be used to for like monks who would create illuminated manuscripts. Um, and so like just like monks would spend like literally their entire time in their monasteries focusing on creating pages after page of just whatever text, and these manuscripts were kind of like life passions for them, and so you can see the same reflection of the passion for art and this kind of like ability to pursue a technique and refine it within John Whitney's work, which I really appreciated. But it's obviously very different in how they go about their end results. Um, and with Nanjun Pike, his reference to the divine. Now I know everyone's going to talk about how it's truly more of like a self-reflection thing, and how the humans and how we interact with the digital world, and I will agree to that to every extent. But we also want to bring into consideration that a lot of his work references and utilizes religious imagery. And I really appreciate this connection to the spiritual because it's both reflecting how we as humans kind of have in the past for eons communicated and worked with divine in our own ways, like how people would talk to and be prophets, um, whatever might be for each specific sect and denomination. Within his own uses of Buddha, it's the reincarnation cycle. Uh, Buddha is in all of us. We are all Buddha. We're all one on the same point. It's a there's a huge amount of Gnosticism to go into that, but the the essential point that I'm trying to make is there is a reference to the digital sphere, and I can go back to this first image though. There's a reference to the spiritual within the digital sphere, and it kind of highlights how do we as humans also change how we pray, how we connect to ourselves and connect to the divine, um, and kind of seeing it as like there's this shrine that I'm seeing in front of me of a lion dog, and I actually tried to figure out which, like, I wanted to confirm that this was in fact a Korean lion dog, which they're, I believe, called. So sorry, I'm looking at my notes. Yes, they're called komanus, and so yeah, the from what I gathered, it has enough some similarities to komanus that it's most likely the type that it has an ungyo or a closed mouth, which reflects the endings. So there's usually a pair, a beginning one with an open mouth and a closed mouth, which is for endings. So it's really interesting to add that layer of context and this again this medium of of a historical relic that's literally defaced. It has like graffiti all over it. It's still made of either concrete or stone. If concrete, then it's, I would argue, even further proving the point of this like brutalism age in which we're disconnecting from the world around us so much so that we're kind of defiling those creatures and giving them a new color, giving them something new. Who's to say it's up to us to define or to determine as the audience and as those who are engaging with it if this is like how we want to give reverence to and honor the past and how we want to move forward, or if we want to like consider our place within this whole grand scheme of legacy, both spiritual and artistic. And with that being said, there is, of course, that the marginalia aspect that I am oh so in love with. As a, I think Pike also kind of people in the interview. I'm not sure if Pike actually had these assumptions, but I know people in the interview about Pike's work were speaking about how Gen Z has like this attachment to the retro and the old. Um, and I would argue it's because we're all raised on the internet. Like we were raised with this, and I have examples here of like literally early 2000s era internet, we had this very glossy, think Windows background with the rolling grass and the blue skies. It was a technological future we were promised that incorporated the natural within the digital. We were promised this allegedly. That's how everyone kind of phrases it. But we were never given that. We were always kind of moved and shoved towards kind of this, I would say, refined. People let's call it modern. I've never understood. I will say this now. I will never understood why modern always meant less of something. Being able to say that it has like a sleeker look, but I would argue that something that has a sleeker look would literally look like it had a shine on it. But this was not sleek, so they moved past this quite fast. But it is definitely something that I've noticed my generation kind of cling onto is it's like preservation and like recreation of these aesthetics and kind of finding ways to curate their own spaces to still modify like their digital spaces to still reflect this a digital age that never once was and kind of like breathe into it a new life, if you will. And separately, I also incorporated a another very people call it a micro trend or a niche aesthetic, but I would argue it was not, given that it kind of saturated so much so that it became a meme and it kind of degraded those who were actually very like there was art to be made here. I believe there was a lot of message to be to be mediumed here, if you will. There's a lot of content that we could collage together to create our own digital sphere in which it reflected how we saw the future, but still incorporated this. There was still I didn't incorporate it on this one because I wasn't sure about copyrights and whose images were whose, but a lot of these images incorporate like real life like statues of marble of different like relics that we would see that would be considered like luxurious or iconic in our real world, and then they're mirrored in the digital world within the scape of whatever brings the creator the most joy. Usually it's some sort of like sunset, some sort of cyberpunk Blade Runner kind of combination, but it's still incorporated many of these marginalities. Like Wikipedia is specifically here is incorporated, but also there's a lot of logos of Windows. There's a lot of like pull from this like how art was influenced by technology and how this conglomeration kind of changed how we kind of interpret our own aesthetics. And so I thought that that was really interesting. Another really interesting, like kind of I would say art movement on the internet from the early to mid 2010s, and kind of seeing the Pike's work really actually reminded me of like this vaporwave aesthetic because there was I'm gonna be so for real like there were internet posts that would kind of like really mimic that. Like you see like technology like on in like a very liminal space with like sometimes there's like some plants in nature, sometimes it's like just like underwater, like in a weird space. And so I feel like Pike's work really walked so that the people on the internet in the early mid 2010s could run with their conglomeration of digital and natural the digital and natural world. Uh, so yeah, I thought that was really interesting. And then kind of to even progress past that, we have like this understanding of like how we communicate to each other on the internet as we're all on social media. Pike even kind of predicted, as they say, that we would all be able to have our own channel, and that is absolutely true. Like, I don't think it was necessarily a prediction as so much like an unavoidable like consequence to giving everyone access to being someone or something under the guise of forgive me, capitalism. There's like this American dream that everyone's being bought and sold, that like we can be something, uh, or be someone. We're one step away from being a billionaire, but this point that this comes to a point that basically we are kind of devolving and being led into our own kind of like rabbit holes, our own algorithms. So there's a balancing point between having to market and brand yourself if you want to become someone, or at least like gain money and fame now, and that's kind of like boiling down to the content of itself doesn't matter. It's how you can get a reaction out of someone. And pardon my cat in the background. I don't know what he's getting into, but we're gonna find out later. So there's a combination of like elements in social media and when branding and marketing oneself that you have to kind of like create a combination of images or words or elements that kind of cue to the signals or signal an audience to kind of like interact in a specific way. And like social and promotional platforms encourage users to promote certain behaviors that encourage these essentially dopamine receptors of ours, um, rather than encouraging perhaps like meditative or like contemplative pieces that would otherwise be like capturing of one's attention. Um, there's still definitely like benefits to understanding how these like psychosocial models work within the artistic, I would say like modality. When you're wanting to be an artist and create, but you also don't want to have to create to an algorithm, um, it becomes a kind of a choice between, do you want to create a community that's as basic as you can around like what you value, or do you care more about like the capital gains that you will uh, have? And this doesn't also this also relates to like social capital as well. Maybe it's like influencers in that way, or maybe not making art, but they're still making a message and they're creating. I mean, honestly, art may be subjective. So perhaps what people in on YouTube who are doing those obscene prank channels, maybe that is art to someone. But in this way, we're kind of we're selling ourselves into a mask, if you will. That do we want to profit off of these very human I guess like desires and natural things that we want to do, and just kind of like profit off of that rather than just experiencing it for ourselves and just kind of being in the moment. And so I really enjoy a lot of the fact that our coursework kind of delves into these philosophies, but I also would love to explore more artists that explore this. I really enjoy Pike's work, and I really do think that um, there is a gap of like specifically art and technology integration. I do appreciate that the one professor from SCAD had kind of talked about the ways in which he was able to highlight different uses of art and technology in different compendiums and anthologies. Um, and I plan on definitely reading into more of those, but I'm very interested to know if there's any more, um, given that there's so much that's been changing in the last few years. But yeah, I think that's it. Thank you so much for listening.